Hi, welcome to my channel, or welcome back, hopefully. I'm Chris, and I love talking about movies, and I recently did a video that was my small but humble Criterion collection, and I figured I'd go through my collection of Arrow Blu-rays. Arrow are kind of like another boutique Blu-ray label where they kind of release or they re-release and remaster cult classics, horror movies, that kind of thing, sometimes a lot of international films as well. And they have lots of lovely added extras, really beautiful restorations of films, and I know that they're kind of like getting into doing really good 4K releases and kind of like rescans of long lost cult movies. But for the most part, I've got like a small kind of tiny collection of them that I've sort of collected over the last couple of years maybe, and I'd figured I'd just go through them because I really enjoy watching these kind of videos. They're really fun to make as well, and maybe you do too, and that's why you're here and watching this video. So without further ado, we're going to get into the first two movies that I own because they're kind of a good kind of pairing to put together because they're both directed by William Friedkin of The Exorcist and French Connection fame, and more recently Sorcerer fame, because that film has kind of had this huge resurgence. And we have got Cruising, made in 1980, starring Al Pacino. And we've also got To Live and Die in LA, starring William Peterson from Manhunter, which was like another Michael Mann movie that came out around the same time. And they're two quite like similar but different films, and they kind of sit really interestingly in William Friedkin's filmography. I actually got both of these around the time that I was on a massive like William Friedkin kick. I'd watched The Exorcist and Sorcerer pretty back to back. The Exorcist obviously being one of the most like genre defining films of its time. Actually way more filmy than I thought it would be. I was kind of expecting something a bit kind of like shocky and schlocky, and it wasn't whatsoever. It's actually a genuinely very well made film. And Sorcerer, which is kind of like one of his lesser known movies that's had this kind of resurgence, that's a remake of Wages of Fear, and it's about these sort of criminals that are kind of on the run, and to get out of this like jungle that they live in, they're having to transport a truck of nitroglycerin from point A to point B, and it's just tense scene after tense scene and just really, really crazy filmmaking. So, my expectations for these films were relatively high when I got around to getting them. I think I saw To Live and Die in LA first, which I think I found quite underwhelming at the time. It didn't really make a lot of sense until I watched The French Connection shortly after, because this feels kind of like a spiritual successor or companion to that film, where The French Connection is just like, God, aren't the police just scumbags, but in the 70s, and this one is, God, aren't the police scumbags, but in the 80s. There's lots of really interesting takes on this film on Letterboxd that go into the kind of neo-noir of it all. Probably far better than I have any authority or kind of stake in. From memory, it's about a cop that is trying to track down a criminal that is counterfeiting money, and the criminal is Willem Dafoe. It's got a really cool soundtrack by Wang Chung, which is like this 80s British synth pop band. And it's also shot by Robbie Mueller, who did Repo Man and Paris, Texas. So it's really gorgeous, obviously, and the restoration is really nice, but the actual plot is kind of weird from memory. I watch a lot of Red Letter Media and their Best of the Worst series that they do, where they watch a lot of kind of like insufferable, schlocky 80s B movies. And this feels like a kind of like genuine elevated version of that, or at least all those B movies are kind of replicating what this film was going for at the time. All round, it's just quite a weird film, really. You hate the main character. Willem Dafoe is weird in it. Surprise, surprise, he was even doing it all the way back then too. The music's really synthy and 80s. The car chase in it is absolutely insane. And it's kind of just like a William Friedkin cop picture, really. Cruising, on the other hand, I think goes extremely hard. And it was really quite controversial for the time as well. The film follows an undercover cop as he infiltrates the underground gay community in New York City after a serial killer is on the loose for killing a bunch of gay men from the scene. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack there. For me to unpack all that now would probably spoil the entire film for you, and also probably would require an entire video on its own just to dig into the politics of that. But I know that like the entire production and release of this film was just kind of drenched in controversy and bad press and bad media coverage, that I think it's since been reevaluated in recent years as quite like an interesting film in the sort of canon of LGBT plus cinema, especially in America and New York. And like taking a step back from kind of like all that context around it, Al Pacino puts in a performance that you will literally never see him do in another film. I think he was even like 40 when he made this or something, and he's kind of like topless in a lot of it, and he's in great shape. You know, and I think after watching this, I really got a sense of like what Arrow as a label is all about. You know, they're releasing these films that are kind of cult classics, maybe misunderstood at the time, or, you know, even hated at the time, but are since being reevaluated. You know, they're sort of B-movie adjacent, they're kind of borderline exploitative, but altogether kind of culturally significant, and, you know, they play a big part in the kind of canon of cinema, especially in kind of like, you know, Western cinema as well. Like, these are the kind of films that you know, probably would have had to seen at midnight in America or something, or in some sort of dark, dingy cinema, but now you can kind of enjoy it, you know, from the comfort of your home, beautifully remastered. So yeah, two good movies. I think I need to rewatch To Live and Die in LA, but Cruising I kind of recommend to people. It's quite a stark movie, but I think you'll be kind of impressed by it, or at least interested by what it's doing. I did find myself genuinely quite gripped by the story of it, whereas To Live and Die in LA, it was kind of like, oh, I thought this film was going to be kind of schlocky and gory and action-packed, and it kind of isn't. It's kind of a little bit more, I don't want to use the word thoughtful, but it's kind of a little bit slower than that, let's put it that way. But that gets us on to Hellraiser, made in 1987 by Clive Barker, and holy moly, this film is pure insanity. This is the kind of film series that I remember seeing a lot in blockbusters when I was a kid. I would see this on the shelf all the time. Hellraiser 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't know how many they've made, but they've made a lot. And I was quite an inquisitive child, especially when it came to movies. I kind of pined over The Matrix as a kid. We owned it on DVD, but whenever I saw it in blockbusters, I'd just kind of like look at the cover and think, what the hell is this movie about? What's going on in this movie? I absolutely have to see it, but wasn't old enough. This film, however, whenever I saw this in blockbusters, I just used to think, hell no, I'm never watching that. That looks terrifying. What could that film possibly be about? And I think I maybe just kind of not avoided it, but just never really felt compelled to watch it throughout my adulthood. But this film is so much more than the reputation that it has. I think it has, you know, it's maybe the kind of film that maybe suffers from its own iconography. Like, it's so much more than the front cover and the sort of bad guy in it. You know, I think people maybe throw it in with like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and like all those long-running slasher series, because there's 10 different installments to them of varying quality and diminishing returns. But from what I understand, Clive Barker himself hasn't actually directed that many movies. I think he's directed like 3, I want to say, and he's kind of written and produced a handful of others. He's one of these kind of like extremely talented multimedia artists. He's done like comics and short stories and books and paintings and all sorts. And I think that really shows in this film. You know, when you think of these slasher films and their sequels as being quite exploitative, gratuitous, cheap, schlocky, this film feels genuinely quite artistic, or at least literary. It's definitely a step above your kind of standard horror fare. I don't really want to go too into detail about the plot, because I think you should just watch it. But, you know, the visual effects are great, the costumes and makeup are great, the actual like world building and lore behind it is really cool and interesting as well. It's really specific and creepy, and the actual story itself is quite compelling and has, you know, a good thrust, a good narrative thrust. I think he even wrote a short story based on it, or it's an adaptation of one that he wrote. And yeah, it just feels that way, you know? It just feels like the film has a lot to say about like lust and love and desire and, you know, things like sadomasochism and stuff like that, and cosmic space horror and Lovecraftian imagery and stuff like that. I haven't read or watched anything else by Clive Barker, but it's the kind of film that you come away from and you think, yeah, that was radical, get me some more of that. I think I even gave this film 5 stars when I saw it. I'm kind of sort of scared to watch it again because it was quite, you know, intense, but I do really want to watch the sequel, at least the second one, so yeah, that gets a recommendation from me for sure. Next on my list is Heathers, which, again, another one I still have in its wrapping. 1988, directed by Michael Lehman. I don't really have an awful lot to say about this one, honestly. I remember not really liking it much when I first saw it, and I've only seen it once as well, but I know my partner really loves it. It definitely deserves a rewatch. I think I was expecting something a bit more outwardly violent or weird and strange, like a Beetlejuice or Little Shop of Horrors, or even something like Cruel Intentions that came out in the 90s or noughties, and I can't really remember where this film lands in that sort of spectrum of films. I do remember the actual like subject matter and narrative being quite dark and definitely pre-1990s in America, if you know what I mean, without saying it explicitly. So I think it deserves a rewatch. If you feel a particular way about Heathers and you think I'm getting it completely wrong and need to reevaluate it, then please let me know in the comments, because this is one of those cult films that I really would like to love, because there's so much to love about it. Let me know. The next one on my list is one that I do own, but I've actually loaned out to a family member, so I don't have it with me physically here. So the next one is Tremors, made in 1990 by Ron Underwood. This is one of those films that just spawned like a trillion sequels of diminishing returns in quality, but I had a lot of fun with this one. Again, it's a film that Red Letter Media have done a really good review of and have a lot of appreciation for. There's a lot of build-up, a lot of payoff, there's a lot of fun characters, very distinct characters, and some really good visual effects and practical effects. It's basically just if Jaws was set in the desert and had a more quirky cowboy setting than the kind of like Spielbergian New England setting. It's basically about just some underground desert worms that terrorize this tiny town called I think the town's called Perfection or something. And yeah, it's just another one of those like solid 90-minute movies that you can just stick on, have loads of fun with. It's got loads of personality and charm. If you're looking for something quick and fun, then just stick it on, of an evening. And I think everybody will get something fun out of it, basically. Dipping our toes into the 90s, we come to The Silence of the Lambs by Jonathan Demme, made in 1991. Another one that I've got in its wrapper that I haven't quite christened yet. I think this might be my favourite overall film out of the Arrow Blu-rays that I've got. It's just such a standout movie of the 90s that I think kind of lives in the shadow of things like Fight Club and Seven and American Beauty when you kind of think about films from the 90s, even though it is really popular and it does have a huge cultural significance. I think I'm right in saying that like a few friends of mine have kind of rated this quite negatively or harshly. I think there's a compulsion to give a film like this, 3.5 stars or 4 stars at most, just because it's quite straightforward in a sense. It's like a murder mystery detective thriller thing that has a good like psychological thriller edge to it. But I think that everything it does extremely well. And I think people take it for granted, really. It's so much more well made than you think. Sometimes with movies, less is more. Sometimes with movies, doing exactly what it needs to do is actually perfect. Jodie Foster, amazing. Anthony Hopkins, amazing. The close-ups throughout the movie, amazing. The actual narrative and story and plot is really, really tight and interesting, and it has something to say about gender in the workplace and gender politics and people that want to become women or women that need to become like men to sort of thrive in the workplace and the industry that they're in. There's actually so much more going on in this film than the popular iconography of Hannibal Lecter sort of, does for it. And the book is kind of the same too, and I did finish reading the book quite recently, so it's kind of quite fresh in my memory that Hannibal Lecter isn't really in it that much, or he isn't really that integral to it. He obviously helps forward the plot along, and he kind of gives us things to learn about with Clarice Sterling, but the film is doing so much more than just Hannibal Lecter wears a mask and is, eats people or something. Yeah, I think as well, like with these releases, there's loads of special edition extras in it as well. There's like audio commentary by critics, there's like visual essays in here, there's interviews, there's lots of behind the scenes featurettes, and I think it's just one of those things that like I do actually need to tuck into the special features here and give this another watch because it's great. It's a hugely underrated film, even though it is rated quite highly. Do you know what I mean? If you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs, then I think you should watch it as soon as possible. And also read it. The book is really, really readable. It's quite a faithful adaptation of the book as well, so it's a double recommendation from me there. Okay, and then we get to the noughties and we get to Battle Royale, made by Kenji Fukasaku. This is one of those films that kind of lived rent-free in my brain as a teenager. I think I watched it a lot when I was 16. I read the book. I reposted a lot of the pictures on Tumblr at the time, which is the same for another film that's kind of in this list that I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, this film is absolutely bonkers. It's fully the precursor to things like The Hunger Games and almost like any kind of Battle Royale-esque film or game that has come out since then as well. It's fully the blueprint for that kind of film. For those who don't know, it's basically a film about an alternate timeline in Japan where the youth are kind of really disobedient and the media kind of have like an iron grip on society. And every year, a really disobedient class of school children will get taken and kidnapped, dropped on an island and forced to fight each other to the death, and the winner kind of becomes sort of like a celebrity, but not in a sort of Hunger Games kind of way, just in a sort of like, hey, this person survived, isn't that crazy? Yeah, being an 18 Arrow release, it's just as graphic and dark and gory and grim as you'd expect. It's another film that I think when it came out was steeped in a lot of controversy. It was kind of treated the same way that A Clockwork Orange was in the UK, in Japan and America. Japanese government were quite scared to let this film out, and I think think in America for quite some time they actually refused to screen it completely. I think I heard somewhere as well that the director was quite militant with the children that are in it, and kind of treated them kind of badly or a bit sort of fiercely. And they also cast friggin' Takeshi Kitano in it as well, who was and is the host of Takeshi's Castle, which is kind of like a sort of battle royale-esque assault course game show that was really big in Japan. And I think that's just amazing casting to get that guy in this film basically playing himself, but in a really kind of dark, macabre kind of way. It's a great movie, and I think I have seen the sequel. And again, even in this Arrow release, there's the theatrical version, there's a special edition director's cut, which I think maybe has more footage and maybe more kind of gore in it, because some gore is kind of cut away from to make it a little bit more audience friendly. There's loads of behind the scenes footage as well, and sort of making of pieces and how they kind of restored some of the footage and stuff like that. So again, it's another one that I do think I just need to book a week off work and just watch special features the entire time and make some notes on it. And then to keep this sort of Japanese cinema train going, we've got Dark Water, released in 2002 by Hideo Nakata. This is not to be confused with Dark Water 2005 or Dark Waters, plural, 2019 with Mark Ruffalo. No, this is Dark Water 2002, directed by the filmmaker behind the original Ring movie, about a single mum who moves into a rundown apartment with her daughter as she's kind of in this sort of legal custody battle for her child. And they're haunted by a supernatural occurrence that kind of keeps happening in this apartment, which is tied to a mysterious missing girl case in the same building. I've only actually seen the American remake of The Ring, so I don't remember a ton about it other than the kind of iconography of the girl crawling through the TV and girl in the closet and, watching the video and yada yada yada. So I can't speak on the original Japanese one either, but I was really struck by how kind of gothic and fairy tale and grounded this film feels. It's just quite a simple story about a woman just trying to get by with her daughter. There's so much emotional baggage to the main characters already, which really benefits the story. And the dark water in the film acts as quite a nice visual metaphor to what's going on in the story. And there's also kind of a nice narrative poetry to what's going on with the missing girl case, what's going on with the daughter that the main character has, and her own kind of childhood traumas that she's kind of carrying with her as well. And it all just kind of coalesces into a nice, neat package of a film, honestly. And one that I feel I would recommend to my mum, because it's not that spooky. There's obviously spooky elements in it, but it's kind of a little bit like things like The Others or What Lies Beneath. Those kind of more middle of the road spooky stories that aren't out and out horror movies with horrible imagery and stories and stuff like that. So yeah, I recommend this one, and it also makes me want to really watch Ring. Great film. And then last but not least, we get on to Donnie Darko by Richard Kelly. I haven't actually watched this movie for a long while. Again, this film kind of was my personality when I was 16 years old, thanks to things like Tumblr. This film is just such a lightning in a bottle moment of the whole thing feeling like an 80s film. It's obviously set in the 80s, but it feels like an 80s film before 80s nostalgia really became what it was because of things like Stranger Things. There's John Hughes in here, there's John Carpenter in here, there's slashy horror type visuals and iconography in there. Kind of reminds you of things like Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street and all those kind of things, all whilst being completely its own thing. The sort of I can't really think of another debut independent film that has come out recently that is cram-packed with as much iconography, style, voice, personality, and also just cultural staying power that this film has. This is how Arrow kind of differs to something like the Criterion Collection in a way, in the sense that its catalogue isn't as chin strokey or head scratchy or highbrow, but a lot of their releases actually have a lot of kind of cultural capital in the canon of cinema. They've actually contributed quite significantly to films and aesthetics and vibes and narratives and imagery that's kind of borrowed and replicated elsewhere, even if they weren't overwhelming financial or critical successes when they came out initially. They've kind of found a new audience in the last 10-20 years or so. And on that note, I haven't actually watched Richard Kelly's follow-up to Donnie Darko, Southland Tales, although I'd love to, but I'm pretty certain that film got him in director's jail, even though it's since been a bit reevaluated and has kind of found a new audience. But just gotta love these flawless directorial debuts that ultimately ruin the career of that filmmaker because they just can't replicate the success of their original film. Looking at you, David Robert Mitchell. But yeah, I think I'd really like to see how this film holds up watching it through a 2026 lens, because I haven't seen it for a while. You know, from memory, there's a lot to do with like teenhood in America, suburban America, middle class America, religion in America as well, but also the traumas and traumatic imagery that's tied to a lot of those things that I think might feel a bit different watching it now in 2026, but you know, it's been a while. It'd be such a tricky film to even summarize the plot to, honestly. But, you know, it got me onto things like Echo and the Bunnymen, Tears for Fears, Duran Duran. It's just a really sick film. And I think that kind of summarizes the collection that I've got in general, really. They're all just really sick films. And, you know, I think bar like one or two, you know, I've really enjoyed a lot of them, really. So there it is. That's kind of a sort of whistle-stop tour through my Arrow collection. You know, if there's anything that you think I need to pick up or watch or try or reevaluate, definitely let me know in the comments below. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Click like and subscribe. Those things really help as well. And yeah, if you've got any other suggestions for videos that you want to see, I do have quite a, right in the way, but I do have quite a decent book collection, which I'd love to go through someday, although that would take me quite some time. Let me know. And yeah, see you on the next one.